Kia ora koutou. Over to, I don't know if there's anything you want to, any opening comments you would like to make, Baz and Raina, and before we go on to question and answers.
Sure, I'll keep it very brief though, but just worth recapping in terms of where we are in the process. So building an LTP or an annual plan, as you all know, is an iterative exercise. A lot of big decisions were actually made last year in November, December. Really, tomorrow is adopting a CD to go out for review by our auditors, if you like. So that's the stage that we're at. They have to do their work, then it comes back, and then a committee adopts it to go out for consultation. So that's the stage that we're at. Just want to recognise the fact that we gave you a lot of information last week. We do appreciate that was quite a lot of reading for you all, but that's a consequence of bringing an annual plan and LTP and water reform into one process. And while it's a little bit more difficult at our end, I think when it comes to consultation, just having that joined up consultation exercise, having one holistic conversation just makes it a lot easier for our community. So I think it's definitely worth doing. We have prepared reasonably well. I think we've had a number of briefings last week in terms of the annual plan, the LTP and water reform. Of course, today we've got another session in terms of questions and answers. We've received, I think, about 120, 130 questions online, so we appreciate those as well. We've given you a first tranche of responses already, and we'll look to get the rest out later today as well, so you should be well informed for tomorrow. And I'll leave it there and happy to take any questions and answers.
Councillor McNulty.
Given it's looking like we're going to put close to $46 million of real spending capital back into next year, I'm just interested for a Treasury or a prudency view, given the whole process of this LTP amendment was to make relatively significant capital cuts, and tomorrow it looks like we'll put about $50 million back in.
It might be useful for you to outline what you think those additions are.
That being the $25 million for Wellington Water. I understand councillors of this table are in the mind to at least put $11 million in for Begonia House and the $11 million for waterfront fencing.
Yeah, so perhaps I'll start with that because, we initiate, the reason we're undertaking this LTP amendment is actually to save money in terms of a capital program and to provide that headroom in our debt parameters. We are in the same position that we were in previous to the amendment in terms of hitting our debt to revenue limits in year 7, I believe, of this LTP, albeit though we are dropping that debt to revenue limit. So there has been some progress made, albeit small, and the increase in, and by including additional capital projects, it does go against the actual nature and intent of what is being achieved here. In terms of financial prudence, that is a matter that we've talked about in terms of a number of different factors and a decision that this council needs to make in terms of balancing what it considers needs to be done in terms of the investment in its infrastructure, because of course not investing in some infrastructure would be imprudent as well, but it needs to be considered in terms of what is that investment versus what is the affordability to our community versus how we're looking at those long-term risks. Ultimately, the auditors will form a view on that. I suspect in the current state, I can't predetermine what that is. I perhaps have had a personal view of that based on my previous experience, and I would suggest that they may be looking at raising that in their audit opinion. Maybe not as a qualification, as an emphasis matter. I simply don't know. They need to form their own independent review. But as it stands, there hasn't been anything, providing those decisions go through, there hasn't actually been anything taken out of the capital program. It has been rephased into outer years.
Just to follow up, so if it does go through the audit process and they actually raise significant concerns about the fact we put $50 million back in the first year, what options do the councillors have given these consultation requirements and things along those lines? We'll have already
Well, ultimately, the long-term plan is the council's document. and the auditor opinion is their opinion, and you know that the implications are ones that maybe central government would want to take. Actually, if I'm being honest, and I don't know what that looks like.
Councillor Calvert.
Yes, look, I see we've got, it's under housing in terms of operational, and I understand the amounts in there cover rates and insurance. Do we pay rates on our social housing?
Yes, we do.
So why do we pay? And then I've looked at the list of properties that seem to be not rateable, and there's a number of properties owned by Dwell Housing Trust. How are they different to us? Yeah.
We'd have to look into that and come back to you.
Okay, thank you. And I'll go back on the list. I've got a few more questions. Thank you.
Councillor Abdurrahman.
Just as related to this one, Andrea, the email you sent regarding the extraordinary meeting. So if this council decide to move an amendment to the council to make an amendment to the long-term plan, are we able to do it, or that's going to be again a bit of an?
Baz or Beth, do you want to?
So the question is basically example, if this council decides to move an amendment to the council to not go ahead with airport paper to be included in the consultation, can this council make a decision again contrary to the LTP decision?
So just to clarify, your question is whether the council as the governing body can make a decision that's different to the committee's decision, or is it whether this committee can make a decision?
Yep, we can frame it that way. Yep.
The way
if the council can make a decision contrary to the committee decision.
Yep, so council can. This is exactly what we talked about quite a lot at the time of the notice of motion. So from a legal and standing orders and delegations perspective, the committee at the moment has the power to develop the long-term plan, right? But the council has the power to adopt it, and council can choose to exercise the delegations that it's given to the committee itself. It can do that at any point in time. Well, it can do that. The question is when and what are the implications, okay? So for council to choose to remove the airport sale from the consultation document, there may be significant implications in terms of process, but also very importantly, there will be quite significant legal risks that we would advise you of very strongly in relation to that, and that you may be exposing the organisation to significant risk because of what I would deem a potentially irrational decision.
But we can do it, right? Basically, we can do it. That's what you're saying. That's
the governing body can essentially do whatever it likes. The question is, the question is, what are the implications? There is a legal framework that it must work within. If it chooses to work outside of that, there are implications for the council. That includes judicial review.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Councillor Pannett.
Thank you, Chair. James, sorry, it's about the Begonia House. Love the Begonia House. So look, just because there's a range of options going on here. So as I understand it, and so anyone's interested, 2.5 million in the budget. But then if we demolished it, we'd need more money, up to 5.4 million to build a new cafe and toilets. But if we go with the middle option, which is the 11 million, the toilets in the cafe will just be in a temporary building, but we'd still have the 2.5 million in the budget, plus the extra money you might have been prepared to spend to get it up to the 11 million. Does that make sense?
The $11 million option from the initial or the indicative business case, which is the one that's referred to in the paper, includes keeping the current cafe, but the staff kitchen and toilets out the back would be demolished, and there would be a temporary facility put in to cover those.
Right, but
that's all included in that $11 million option as outlined in the initial business case.
And just to be clear, though, the gap between the 11 million and the 2.5 million is not as great because you would still have to spend some extra money to build the cafe if the thing was demolished.
So if you went with the demolish option, I think what we're saying there is that there is some range of rough order of costs, and we haven't yet actually determined exactly what it would be, because to some extent it's determined by whatever remediation is chosen as the design for when the building is demolished. There are options in terms of how you would do if you were going to go down the demolish path, how you would do the cafe. You could potentially leave the cafe that part of the current building, or you could demolish it and build a new one. And it would really depend which one was the most efficient, financially efficient way of approaching it. So at somewhere in that range would be the cost of demolition and, in essence, restoring the cafe back to full operation.
But it could definitely be worth more than 2.5 million.
I suspect that's exactly correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Randall.
I know officers have got a lot of questions from elected members, and that they've certainly done their best to answer them, but can you just confirm that not all the questions have been answered, and whether or not there will be written answers for the questions that were submitted on Monday?
Yes, there will be. So we're working through them. We're closing most of them out today, and so you'll get them this afternoon.
Okay, so thank you. At the beginning of the paper around this, there's a note of Crown Observer advice that recommended that the consultation document be recommended for council for approval. Is it possible to get a copy of what that advice is from the Crown Observer and why we're doing it this way?
Sure.
Okay, so could that be circulated to elected members, or under some? I mean, I'm also looking at if you want to comment, Lindsay.
I'm happy with my advice being circulated.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So, in terms of a question I haven't got answered, one of the things I found to do with water and stormwater in particular. So, from the 26-27 year, I noticed that all the budgets associated with stormwater have been sort of zeroed out. But my understanding is that we're only transferring the assets of fresh and wastewater, and that the assets of stormwater still remain with the council. And so I'm wondering why we're not spending anything on our is that an error, or is that something that's still being worked through? I find that very confusing. And how is it to be funded in that?
Kia ora, councillor. So if I can just take you back to December, the 11th of December LTP committee meeting. So the decision was taken to go out to consult on 3 options, and all 3 options were for 3 waters. So the multi-council, 3 waters CCO, a go alone, 3 waters CCO, and the current arrangements.
Okay, so does that decision mean that we're actually passing across the asset value of our stormwater, and so that will be, the stormwater will literally be owned by the new entity?
The piped network, yes.
And that's permitted under the legislation?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Can I go back on the list?
Yes, Councillor Calvert.
Yeah, thank you. Just following on from the Observer's advice, when did officers receive that from the Observer?
I don't have the exact date.
Or 2 days, 1 week?
Probably within the last week.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And has the council obtained any legal advice itself on that legal advice?
Sorry, in terms of legal advice, so not in response to getting that from the Observer. However, we've had legal advice previously on this matter, which we have communicated to you.
Okay, thank you. My next question is about the rates that we need to pay on our utilities water, and officers are proposing to put that onto debt. Now, other than having the commonality of water, this is rates paying for an operational service being spent today. So it's almost like buying my coffee today, drinking it, but putting it on the credit card for somebody else to pick up. So I just want to be quite, is this legal?
Yes.
So why don't we put all our operational expenses on debt then? And we'd be able to reduce our rates increase by quite a bit.
Well, you need to pay for it at some point in time, Councillor, and so this is a temporary provision that we are proposing to avoid a significant rates increase for the future financial year, reflecting that we're also going into a water reform process.
But regardless of whatever, people still have to pay rates on utilities, and we'd still have to pay the rates if we owned the asset, wouldn't we?
Yep.
Yeah. So why did we just settle on water assets? We instead of saying, well, let's put the rates of our social housing on debt.
That would be a decision for the elected members. What I would note is that we are taking this action as a result of a revaluation increase that has happened, and rather than ensuring that we have a massive rates impact for the next year in terms of fully funding that, we are deferring the funding of that as we have done with previous water revaluations to ensure that we can stage that increase.
But we've done that.
I'm sorry, Councillor, I can put you back on the list. Right. Councillor O'Neill.
Kia ora anō. My pātai is around the Watts Peninsula and what we're consulting with in terms. Mātai Moana, Watts Peninsula. Are we mostly seeking feedback from the community, either joint agreement or no joint agreement, or is it broader than that? And can community give feedback on what their aspirations are for the park?
So at a high level, it is the two options that you see in the consultation document. So it is on the management approach. I don't know if Moana's in the room to be able to speak to it in more detail. Well, Paul.
Through you, Madam Chair. Negotiations between iwi and the Crown and Council go back as far as a decade. So I suppose we're at a point where this is really an agreement between the Crown, iwi and Council's involvement in terms of future management. So that's the options that are available that we're considering. We have previously rates funded funding for the operating costs related to this area. But because we didn't have an agreement, we've never started to spend that money. So it is really going back to the community and saying we're now at a point where we can establish that agreement.
Cool. Second one, just off of that. When ward councillors met with Kara, we spoke about an integrated communications plan. I just wondered if the content that's going to be put out or even the words written in the paper have been done with kind of in tandem or in consultation with Taranaki Whānui?
Yeah, I can help with that, Paul. So that's correct that it has been. I actually spoke with Kara yesterday, so the content in the consultation document is familiar to him and his iwi, as is the LINZ CE and the Minister.
Cool. Last part noting the options that we're putting out as joint agreement or no joint agreement, will Council, if selected joint agreement, will Council be running more public consultations in the future as to get a broader sense of what we want from the community around the peninsula? Will there be more options?
Yeah, yes. So it's a decision point. So what will happen if Council was of a mind to do this? It would start a process of community-based design workshops in and around what happens on the peninsula, but also via the Reserve Management Act. There's a process stipulated there that requires us to go through a certain consultation process and public process to adopt the management plan for the site.
Councillor Free.
Thank you, Terry, for asking about Mātai Moana. Have we funded, I see there's money from the Plymouth Fund for initial amount of, but it does say 750,000 a year. Has that been accounted for in our LTP? If the public were to go for the option of a
Yes,
of us?
it has. Yeah, It's been an ongoing recurring operational cost in there, and the Plymouth Fund is going to support the process going forward.
Okay, but that wouldn't be quite enough for 10 years' worth. So there's additional money, you're telling me?
Yeah, once you do the design piece on the peninsula, understand what the asset's going to do and perform and how much it's going to cost, we'll be back to council to talk to you about how we manage that and plan for it.
It's very exciting.
Councillor Abdurrahman.
Regardless to the fee and charge increases, to be specific, how much are you expecting from the premium ground fields from the increase of it? How much are you expecting?
Through you, Madam Chair, I have to come back to councillors on the specifics of that. So you just want to know what the premium ground fee will be, what additional revenue we will cover.
Cool. I have a follow-up question. What is the justification for the premium ground fees going from 0 to 5,875 for 5 nights?
I would need to check the context. There will be a current fee for a premier field. It won't be 0. So
it says in the paper, it says page 644. For 1 night, it's increasing from 0 to it's newly introduced. It's going up by 1,175. For 2 nights, 2,350. For 5 nights, 5,875. And I wonder, what is the justification of this increases, and how do you determine in what areas of fee you increase by how much? Because I think it's my understanding for sport fields, isn't it? Yeah. Premium. Yeah.
So obviously we have a revenue and financing policy that dictates how much we recover for sports fields.
Yep.
That combines both artificial and natural turf. What dictates how we charge, as you're aware, councillor, juniors are free on natural turf and pay 50% of the cost on artificial. It really relates to the level of service, and obviously a premier sand field has much higher capital and operating costs, so it's a high cost, as is, I suppose, servicing a senior cricket wicket. I'm not specific. I will happy to talk to you after the meeting to just understand what your specific question is about that particular fee increase.
Cool. Again, to follow up, actually, it's not only this one. I looked at it. It says use of outdoor training lights per field for seasonal booking used to be now $555, and for single booking, it's increasing $37 up. And Kilbirnie Recreation inflatable used to be $70. It's going to be $330. And I just wonder, this is going to impact families who are really struggling, and the jump is not a small jump like 50 cents or some. I'm just trying to understand the justifications of such a big jump at this stage.
Yeah, I suppose, again, happy to talk to you about the inflatable fee. I imagine that is for a booking where someone wants to put the inflatable. It'll reflect the labour cost of putting that inflatable up in the facility for an event. So some of those might be more specific event-related fees. I know with, particularly with natural turf, on the back of the FIFA World Cup, we have lit some fields that are used for games or potentially for training. We never had a charge for lighting on those fields, so it's a new charge. So there will be some new charges for new levels of service as well.
Councillor Young, did you have a question online?
Yes, thank you, I do. It goes back to Watts Peninsula. Just thinking about the negotiations over the years, where is the council at, if anywhere, on the prospect of having a sculpture park on part of the land? Do we know at this stage, or is it still rather vague?
No, we don't have any further details on that, councillor. It is still rather vague.
Thank you.
Councillor Randall.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on First, Councillor Calvert's comment around the $6.5 million in water rates, extra water rates due to the revaluation.
Just ordinary rates, aren't they?
Well, sorry?
Just ordinary rates.
So first, well, I mean, no. It's my understanding that they're actually water rates. But the amount, of course, is, if it was on the top of all the rates, is about 3% or something. Will the new entity, having taken over these assets, will they have to pay the same amount of rates in 2026-27?
Correct. So once the assets are transferred over to the new entity, they will be charged rates from both Wellington City Council and Greater Wellington Regional Council, and that will be based on whatever the increase in rates is for both those councils for that year.
And so it's officer recommendation that we put onto the debt $16.5 million for the 25-26 year, and then pass that debt on to the new water entity as well to pay for in the same year, I guess, that they're going to pay another lot of rates.
That has to be confirmed yet, but yes, you're correct. We do a transfer between, or a journal entry as such. We don't physically pay those rates in cash to ourselves. It is just an entry, so what we're not doing is funding that via rates, and it is just, not increasing our debt because we're not actually physically paying it. It's a non-cash expense.
Okay, so if the $16.5 million of rates goes on to debt and we pass it to the new water entity, the new water entity is going to have to come up with the real cash to pay that debt back.
I think, though, it's not going to be passed on through debt because we're not actually physically raising the debt to pass it on. That's what Raina mentioned. We're not drawing down debt to fund this. We're just not funding it. It's an internal transaction.
So it means that our budget is not balanced, so we're not collecting enough revenue to cover the costs that we're incurring, cash and non-cash.
Oh, I find that.
Okay, I'll put you, do you have more questions? I can put you back on the list. All right, Councillor Calvert.
Oh, well, I'll just ask the follow-on question. I thought we legally were required to balance our budget.
You are under Section 100 of the Local Government Act. However, you have made resolutions and would be seeking a further resolution to be made not to balance the budget. Many councils choose not to do so if they believe that they have adequate reasons for it being prudent, and it's just a matter of being clear about that rationale, which we have been in the last 3 or 4 years since we've decided not to set a balanced budget. However, you may recall that our finances look a little bit different with the sludge revenue coming in. So it kind of masks that underlying situation, but we still choose to treat it in a similar way just so that there's complete transparency.
So should we have a because I don't recall seeing it, should we have a recommendation that we're agreeing not to have a balanced budget?
Not at this point in time, because at this point in time we've got the sludge revenues to cover this matter, but within the LTP documents itself, because remember you're just amending the LTP, you don't need to, and then when it comes to the annual plan process, you would need to do that in setting the budgets.
Okay, thank you. And just one question about Matai Moana. What happens if we didn't want to fund this? What if we pushed back and said, government, you can fund? What would happen? Because we haven't got any money.
No, I think, the decisions for council, of course, but I would imagine it goes to Mana Whenua and the Crown to talk about its future. And I'm sure, the community will find out about it, given the significance of the site. But Moana might have a few more matters she can add.
Yes, so this has been ongoing for a long time. And so we've held this money in the budget for a long time. Sod's law, of course, these things come up just at a time we were facing particular financial constraints. So this is still subject to ministerial decision. So we're going out and consulting on it pending a ministerial decision, and obviously we'll have that by the time you make a final decision in June. it would make things very difficult. This has been a long-standing agreement that has been in here, but of course it is entirely up to you whether or not you still want to do that. We can't say what this would mean for the project, whether or not it would go ahead. That would be the subject of future conversations, but this has been in the budget, I think, since 2018. We have been very keen to progress this because the heritage aspects up there, both colonial and Māori, are deteriorating, and we would like to be able to get in there and stop them from deteriorating further. They are quite unique in the world to have colonial and Māori heritage in one place, and so that's the reason why we have been keen to get up there and to protect those and to open this up for the public and make it accessible so everyone can enjoy it. But of course, understanding the constraints you're under, it is entirely up to you whether this is still a priority. But from an officer perspective, we are very keen to progress this because it has been a long time that we've been waiting.
Thank you.
Councillor McNulty.
Still on. Look, I'm speed reading the advice from the Crown Observer, so that's just been circulated, so I may be slightly inaccurate in what I've taken away here. He agrees with the legal advice around the committee delegations, but there's issues that that delegation has a lack of specificity, I think is a fair summation from my speed read. So what I'm trying to understand, what options are available to Council tomorrow when we meet after the committee that would be different prior to having receipt of the advice? What's changing on the back of this advice?
While Beth is walking up, I'll note, Councillor, that you've sent a request and we will send you or you've sent an email and we will respond to that email, but Beth will be able to give a verbal update as well.
Can I just clarify, Councillor, is your question essentially the same as per your email, which is what are the options available to Council as the governing body once it receives the committee's recommendations?
I suppose it's that, it's just with the extension of what's changed from, are those options different to what we previously understood them to be given the Crown Observer's advice?
No, it's just that the committee here is deciding to recommend to Council to have a look at, for Council to make the decision as well, right? So it's a different step. Now, in these circumstances, that we don't think that creates significant practical or legal implications. Because it is sending a consultation document to audit. That is what is going to be happening. In other circumstances, that might be completely different, and there might be really significant implications for Council, like for an additional step for Council to make a decision. So it's really done on a case-by-case basis. But for tomorrow's decision, which is referring the consultation document to audit, and that we're reasonably comfortable that that doesn't create any legal or practical implications that you should be aware of when making that decision.
Councillor Randall.
Okay, going back to the water, got that wrong. And just in terms of the overall numbers, because I've sort of asked for these numbers but I haven't seen them, what is the over amount of the water assets that we're transferring, or the assets that we're transferring to the new, proposing transferring to the new entity, and what amount of debt associated with those assets are being transferred, and what's our assets left behind and the amount of debt left behind?
All of that information is in the Q&As that will be coming out this afternoon.
I will note that the amount of debt, Councillor, is yet to be agreed as well. So you've made a specific resolution that the regional model is the preferred model as long as there is an agreement to the appropriate debt transfer, that we're no worse off. For the purpose of preparing the underlying information, it puts us in a really difficult position. So what we've done is we've assumed that, because it's the Council's preferred option, and so we've assumed a proxy for the debt, but that is still yet to be approved. So we've taken an amount, but again, that will change over the course. It's just an underlying assumption to help with the transfer. And simply all we've done is taken the current book value of the assets and taken them out as at 1 July 2026. So it's a very broad, high-level assumption, but for the purpose of the LTP amendment, it was the most pragmatic one to take. And even if a standalone CCO was the taken option, that would still be the transaction that you would undertake as well.
Yeah, look, I know this is really difficult, trying to do stuff early when there's no certainty. Can I ask that if there is more clearer information that's going to occur before the consultation and documents put to the public, that it be added to the consultation document so that they have a broad idea of the assumed amounts?
And that will come through also in the water reform component of the consultation document. I think we're trying to do these things in parallel and get things to audit. So, we'll look at that, absolutely.
Of course.
I think Margot's nodding her head, so...
Also, in the document, in terms of financing the water entity, I note that the city council share of the regional water entity is deemed to be 42.3%. So I was wanting to ask, how was that proportion determined? On what basis was that proportion determined? Because I understood that in terms of asset value, that we've got 50% of all the assets in the new entity.
The methodology that's been taken is based on a population share, and so that question has come through in the Q&A, and so we've provided an answer in there with the breakdown of each of the territorial authorities' population share, the percentage split.
So the percentage is based on population, not on asset value or funding or anything like that?
Correct.
And why was that decided?
You've asked 4 questions already.
Okay, so I'll go on the list again, thanks.
Councillor Abdurrahman. Okay. Councillor Calvert.
Sorry to go back to the Observer's advice, but my interpretation of it, and again, it's a quick read, is that Council tomorrow, after receiving a recommendation from the committee, does not need to send the document through in its as per recommended by the committee. It can vote to make any changes to it. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think that's a question for your own legal advisors.
Beth, thank you.
Yes, at a high level, that's correct, Councillor Calvert. The question is making sure we get the process correct. And I would just say that depending on the scope of the changes that may be proposed by Council as the governing body, we may need to advise as to any legal risks associated with some of the recommendations. If, for example, there was a proposal to remove the council sale option from the consultation document, then we would very strongly advise against that for a range of legal and other reasons.
But essentially, council can do a lot of things. It could also determine to adjourn the meeting for a few days. It could do anything like that as part of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the question is, with all of these things, it comes down to the practical implications of council's decisions.
Could I just highlight just some of those practical implications just for completeness? We'll have our auditors on site completing this work. If there is delays in this, the practical reality is our audit will be pushed back, and the auditors, we already know that there's under-resourcing of auditors at the moment. It could mean that we miss our turn for audit. They are also auditing a number of LTPs. Some councils had the option to defer their long-term plans. If that was the case, that means that while we've still got our statutory process to go out and consult and take that feedback, it could have a risk of not adopting our long-term plan amendment within the statutory deadline, recognising you also have a recess in July, and that could have implications for our ability to set rates again. So I just, we would try and accommodate any timeframes, but recognising those are the practical implications of that.
Will we be able to ask the auditor tomorrow? Will they be here?
Well, I think they won't be here because that's not part of theirs, but the auditor has already talked to us about the timing of the audit, which we've committed to. We have been given advice that if we miss that deadline, they have other priorities. We don't know when we'd be able to negotiate that, and nor would they be able to answer that. They would need to take it back into their resourcing process to get confirmation.
Thank you.
Councillor Abdurrahman.
So I think this Crown's Observer's advice is really important to see related to the report that been released as well to the Minister. So when that notice of motion came, the idea that came from the officers to do it after the December meeting wouldn't be practically possible from what you're saying now, because if we say we decide at the long-term plan committee saying that, yeah, we're selling the airport, but the next day you try to make a decision to litigate the decision the day before, it would trigger, from what you're saying, for the auditors as well to have a problem to do it. Is that what?
I'm not clear, Councillor Abdurrahman. Is your question if we'd left and there was no notice of motion,
yes,
and we'd provided advice in the December as planned, or November, December as planned, on the airport sale, that decision was to go to council?
Yes, and then the council can make a decision, which means you have to do the long-term plan all over again, right?
So yes, there would always be implications for the long-term plan, and but in saying that, it would have been a whole 6 months down the track, which I think is the observer's point, not to put words in their mouth, but you know, it would be a whole 6 months down the track, and there would be an alternative process to follow.
So the whole thing is going to be going around the circle in that case, even if we make a decision after the 6 months ahead as well, similar to what we're doing now. If we make a decision after tomorrow during council's meeting to make any amendments.
I think there's two separate issues here, Councillor Abdurrahman. One is a process issue in terms of who can make the decision to adopt the consultation document, and at this point in time our processes is that it goes through the LTP Finance and Performance Committee has the delegation to recommend that this goes to goes to audit, etc., but the council still needs to adopt the actual document, the statutory document. What we're doing is giving an opportunity for you to make that say right before the audit, because when we get to the audit timeframe, you can't make any changes because you need to adopt a document with the audit opinion in it. So we're giving you another option before the audit is completed, albeit that option still has risks and implications, as does everything, but it gives you more flexibility.
Absolutely get it that, and thank you for explaining it in detailed ways. But what I'm basically saying here is, look, the observer says here, the long-term plan and finance committee has comprehensive delegation to develop the long-term plan, save the final council adoption step, which cannot be delegated. And during a meeting in June, July, it seems the understanding of some councillors here is the council's job is only rubber stamping. So that means wrong, right?
The purpose of this session is to inform decisions around the LTP and the annual plan that we're making tomorrow.
Yeah.
So it would be good if any of the questions could be focused around the process that we are following.
Okay, let me frame it. You're right, Madam Chair. So do you think the advice you got previously, the legal advice you got, in any way in contradiction with the observer's advice?
No, I don't believe that's to be the case at all.
Could you also rule out...
I'm sorry, I can put you back on the list, Councillor.
Yep.
I have a question. If there are significant changes made at the council that are different than that made by the LTP Finance and Performance Committee, how does that relate to our Tākaihere agreement and the role of mana whenua in our decision making?
If the council were to make those changes, then taikahere partners and those mana whenua or pauiwi would be excluded from that decision making, and they wouldn't be participating in that potential discussion.
Thank you. Councillor Randall, were you back on the list? Did you have additional questions? I think it's your go.
Yes. Just want to, given it's something we're talking about it, I just wanted to finalise to say that what's the officer's advice on whether or not this approach that's being used for this council meeting to approve the long-term plan amendment, will that be the approach recommended by officers for the council meetings through the rest of the long-term plan amendment process through to its final decision in June?
Yes, because the council needs to be the ones that adopt the consultation document, which includes the audit opinion, and the council also needs to be the ones that adopt the LTP and then also go on to set the rates. Okay. That cannot be delegated.
Yeah, no. Thank you for the clarification. My second question is to do with the waste minimisation government funding. Given the announcements that the government has made around the cuts to the government contribution towards waste minimisation programs, can officers outline whether or not there has been a change to the government funding that was been assumed, and if so, if that change is a cut, how is the shortfall in the funding to be made good in the programs we propose going forward?
Certainly. So, for clarity, there hasn't been a cut in waste levy funding for councils at all. All they're doing at the moment is actually they're reviewing the waste levy and other parts of the waste system. So there's certainly been no cut announced. What was the other part of your question, sorry?
Well, if it has been a cut, whether what means so you were still assuming you were going to get some tens of millions from government funding through the waste levy fund.
Yep, sorry.
As was predicted last year or the year before.
No. So sorry, to your point, I can clarify there has not been any announcement that there's going to be any cut, and the fund that we've accessed to help with the bins and the organics processing plant is a separate fund that MFE holds. I've been in discussions with the MFE and they've confirmed that there is still sufficient funding in there for what we propose to do. But obviously part of that process is to just finalise our application and lodge it with them, and we can do that. We've had obviously some challenges with the LTP, but the funding is still there, providing that the business case is good enough and it stacks up.
Okay, thanks for that. It was a concern that wasn't mentioned. The third question is, and this goes towards me looking to the actual account activities. I noticed that in the operational activity under the Tinakau program, that cost has increased by 17.9 million in the 2025-26 year and increased by 21 million in the 26-27 year. Why is the cost of the Tinakau operating budget increasing by so much money?
I believe there was a resolution at some time last year to transfer funding from the holding amount that was in the capital expenditure to operating expenditure for the City to Sea Bridge.
Okay, could hopefully get a written answer to that too, because I find it very confusing.
Is it in the Q&As?
Yes, it is.
Yep. Okay, that'll come through.
Okay, so I've got a couple more, but.
If we have time, which I think unlikely, Councillor Pennant.
Very quickly, Chris, is it your understanding that MFE is looking favourably towards our proposal?
That's my understanding. It's a great proposal.
And James, sorry, just really quickly. So we will not spend any money that we put aside for the City to Sea Bridge before the court case?
Yes, ma'am. We won't do that, Councillor.
Thank you.
Councillor Calvert. Oh, actually, I have. Sorry, I know why I had your name on the list, and it's because Andrea has an answer to your previous question.
I've just got an email. So under the Local Government Rating Act, who knew, land used or occupied by or for the purposes of an institution that's carried on for free maintenance or relief of persons in need, being land that does not exceed 1.5 hectares. So there's actually a threshold within the Local Government Rating Act with a certain land threshold, and so that is why those properties are non-rateable. It has to be considered for one institution as a whole, and it has to be for those properties. So they meet that criteria that was reviewed last year.
So you're saying that because all their dwell properties equal less than 1.5 or more than
1.5, less than 1.5 hectares.
What about us?
We don't have less than 1.5 hectares. We're well over that.
What about the properties that we transferred to Toimahana?
No, it's still far in excess of 1.5 hectares.
But we only transferred about 5 properties?
Oh, okay. I don't know. I think it's what has been held, so they may actually be subject to a rebate.
Councillor Abdurrahman, do you have more questions? Okay, back to you, Councillor Randall.
Yes, thank you. In the operating budget around parking services income, it's estimated to be $40 million a year ongoing. Yet I understand that there's to be hundreds of street-side metered parkings that are going to be converted to bus lanes and cycleways. How is the level of revenue being maintained when we are losing so many contributors towards that revenue?
I'll start. So Vida's here. I know she's been doing some work with Kevin Black and the parking team in terms of the on-street car parking resource in the city. So you might have some more details to offer about I think what the question is a forward projection of income and revenue from car parking. How are we managing the impact from the on-street changes?
Yeah. We have, Kevin and I have actually been working on a written answer to this, which I think is coming in the next tranche of the Q&As. So that will probably be the best way to answer the question. But we're looking at the parking policy, and when projects come through, that has to be one of the considerations that's taken into annual plans and LTP processes.
So okay. So is the answer that the future projects haven't been taken into account in the forward projections?
No, I think from a business casing point of view, I think it's going to be considered. I think what we're doing in the Q&A document is providing with Kevin a full answer to your written questions on what the impact is and the forecast impact.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, the question asks how is the funding level to be maintained? So if that's
well, again, I think the question's going to help suggest strategies around that funding hit.
Okay. And my last question, I was making last. Does the council now assume that the subsidy to Tākina will need to be between $14 and $15 million a year instead of the $10 to $11 million a year that was forecast under the previous long-term plan?
Sorry, Councillor, can you repeat the amounts?
So does the council now assume that the subsidy needed to support Tākina will be $14 to $15 million per year instead of the $10 to $11 million a year estimated under the previous long-term plan or the current long-term plan?
Yeah, if that is the difference, it's because we're basically counting lower revenue projections. So basically looking at the overall conferencing market and income market and our understanding of the exhibition market and the revenue that's generated from that. Correct, those revenue projections have been kind of downgraded.
Okay. I've got other questions, but we can stop there, I guess, in terms of my...
Are they ones that you've asked in the written Q&A?
Yes.
Then you can expect them in the written Q&A. All right, what we were going to do now, thank you very much to everybody for answering all our questions. We are going to take a 5-minute break and we will come back for the next session, which is not live streamed. So thank you, everyone.